I know that people have traveled here from different parts of the country. Hopefully some of y'all are from Texas, from my home state. I'm Julián, Castro, and I know that we're going to get into a question and answer. And so let me just start off by saying that yesterday here in Las Vegas, one of the things I did was to accompany a team of people from the Nevada Homeless Alliance and Help Nevada into storm tunnels, drain tunnels that run right underneath the Las Vegas Strip to talk to men and women who are homeless in this community, who live in these storm tunnels. And it wasn't lost on me or anybody else there that underneath hotels that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars in one of the places that's known around the world as a playground for people throughout this country and the world, that you have people who are living in deep poverty, sleeping not even on the street, but in a drainage tunnel. And when we look up at those hotels, we have so many people who are working 40, 50, 60 hours in the casino or in the hotel, in the service sector industry, who are not able to provide for their family and to pay the rent, because we know that the rents have been going up, people paying 50, 60, 70% of their income in rent every month. I'm running for president because I feel very blessed in my life to have had wonderful opportunities in this country, to grow up in a single-parent household, but go to the public schools of San Antonio, and then go to college and to law school, get to be the first in my family to become a professional, to represent my home community of San Antonio, and then represent the nation as a housing secretary for President Obama. I want to make sure that no matter who you are in this country, that you can reach your dreams too. And today we're going to have a conversation, I know, about how we make sure that that's true for everybody. The vision that I have for this country in the years to come is that we be the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation on earth. I'll say that one more time. The smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation on earth. And the issues of income inequality, making sure that people earn a decent wage, that people can afford housing, and that we have a healthcare system that actually delivers health care and not just health insurance as part of that. Gracias. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So you come from a state, Texas, which has one of the greatest levels of inequality, many poor people and many rich people. And we're in a nation where poverty rate remains too high. 11% of Caucasians, of whites are in poverty, 19% of Hispanics, 22% of African Americans. What would you do? What do you recommend? And you please give as many specifics as you can to reduce all this inequality and to reduce poverty.
Of course, that's a big question. There are a lot of things that I would do. Maybe I'll just stand up and speak to the crowd. Number one, we haven't raised the minimum wage in 10 years in this country. We need to raise the minimum wage to $15 and pay people a more livable wage. We also need to do things like pass the Paycheck Fairness Act so that people get equal pay for equal work. We need to ensure that workers have the right to organize. In too many states, like Texas, it's a quote-unquote right-to-work state, which basically means right to work for whatever they want to pay you. At the federal level, we need to create incentives so that states will recognize the value of organizing. And as president, I would appoint people to the National Labor Relations Board that understand the value of organizing and of unions. We also need a tax code that rewards work instead of just wealth. Y'all probably saw a few weeks ago that there was a report that Amazon made more than $11 billion in profit last year, but didn't pay any federal tax. And another report just a few days ago cited 60 American companies, well-known companies, big companies, that didn't pay any federal tax. For the last 40 years in this country, we've been asking more and more of the middle class and the working poor and the poor, and less of people at the very top and of big corporations. We need to change that. So, Steve, there's so many different ways we're going to tackle that. Of course, housing is a big part of that. I look forward to hopefully a conversation about that. But let me mention also one community that you didn't mention, which is Native Americans. When I was at HUD, I traveled to 100 different communities in 39 states. And the deepest poverty that I saw was on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. I went to this house in Pine Ridge, and it was this very small, old, modest house. There were 17 or 18 people who were living in this little house, including 2 families that were living in the basement, this dirt floor basement, and their room was separated by a bed sheet. We need to get back to an America where everybody counts in this country. And with our president, that's the kind of administration that I'd like to be a part of.
Thank you. Sometimes I've interviewed conservatives who say, oh, the solution for fast food workers who make $7.25 an hour, if they're complaining about living in poverty, they should go to college, they should get a degree and find a better job. And I say to them, that ain't very realistic. But in terms of policies to lift low-wage workers, do you support EITC, training, housing subsidies? What specific proposals would you push? Would you think would be the best way to lift all these workers on the bottom?
Well, I think one of them is to raise the minimum wage so that people are able to make a livable wage, but certainly to do things like expand the earned income tax credit, to invest in housing that is affordable. I see it as paying the worker what he or she deserves, and then meeting them halfway robustly with a 21st century safety net. That's why it's important that we invest in housing that's affordable, but also that's why it's important that we have universal health care. I had a grandmother, I grew up when my grandma had come over from Mexico when she was 7 because her parents passed away. She ended up on the west side of San Antonio. She never finished elementary school. So she worked as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter for her whole life and raised my mom as a single parent. And, in her later years, she had diabetes. And when I was growing up, we watched her condition get worse and worse. But that whole time, she had Medicare. I want to make sure that we strengthen Medicare for the people who have it, and then make Medicare available to every single person in this country. Now think about people who drive an Uber or a Lyft, or the fact that so many more companies don't consider people employees, they consider them independent contractors, which too many times is just a way around giving people benefits, right? So what that means is that we need to hold the companies accountable, but it means that we need an active government response to that, to fill that gap with a 21st century safety net about universal health care, about affordable housing, and also universal higher education, so that people can go to tuition-free public universities, community colleges, or apprenticeship programs. The other thing I'll just mention is that because at the beginning of your question, you said, well, some of these folks say, well, why don't these guys or women, why don't they just all go to college? I know that a lot of people are going to go to college. I know that also some people are not. And we have to give robust options to our young people who are not going to end up going to college. I know that's a sensitive issue, especially in communities of color, because you know what? For a long time, we were tracked away from the ability to go to college. Right? We don't want to track anybody in that direction, but we also want to meet the needs of young people who choose not to do that. Right? And a couple weeks ago, I was in Iowa and I visited this Skills Trade Alliance high school where they're training people in 39 different trades. I believe that we need to invest in that kind of education along with the great apprenticeship programs that labor has perfected over the years to create a generation of people who are skilled in different trades and ensure that they have the skills and the knowledge that they need to get gainful, good-paying employment in the years to come and help lift themselves and their families out of poverty.
As you know better than I, in many states in the South, unions are very weak. In Texas and Mississippi and South Carolina, North Carolina, sometimes fewer than 1 in 20 workers are in a union. And I think that's one of the reasons wages are lower in the South than elsewhere. So what do you think it means for the South that unions are so weak there, and what would you do to help increase the size of unions in the South and indeed nationwide?
Yeah. Well, of course, I recognize that it's not as simple as waving a magic wand in Washington, D.C. and changing the state laws of states across the country. But I would seek every single opportunity, from my appointments as president to legislation that would incentivize states to move away from right to work and give workers the right to organize, and then support those states by incentivizing them in the different federal processes, whether it's grants or other things, to allow workers to organize. I also believe, frankly, that we need to look at new and creative ways that respond to how companies and local and state governments are behaving today. For instance, Amazon recently had been proposed to get $3 billion to relocate a second headquarters in New York. That deal fell apart, but that offer was on the table. I believe that if you're a state government, that you should make the right to organize, right, or the how a company treats its workers and their ability to organize, one of the tenets of how you evaluate them for economic development incentives. And in DC, we should do the same thing. Because we need to send a strong message to these companies that allowing workers to organize is the right thing to do and that they should do it, and put some pressure on them to do it. The last thing I'll say is that I have a track record. I served on the city council of San Antonio, I served as mayor of San Antonio, I served as HUD secretary. At every juncture of my public service career, I have been supportive of labor. I have encouraged employees to be part of labor when I was city councilman and mayor, supporting the efforts of SEIU back then as they organized in City Hall, supporting their efforts as they tried to organize nurses in San Antonio, and at HUD as well, supporting the rights of federal government employees as they negotiated a contract with the federal government. And I will continue to do that if I'm president. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at my alma mater at Stanford, and I visited with the local SEIU chapter out there because they're getting ready to negotiate a contract with Stanford University. So I signed on to a letter that said, hey, to the president, you should negotiate in good faith and pay these workers what they're worth. Do the right thing. And on top of that, finally, on top of that, I'm not just going to talk the talk. In this campaign, I'm actually walking the walk. I'm supporting the unionization of our campaign staff who are about to unionize. And we're paying even our interns $15 an hour because we believe in not doing like this.
Mr. Secretary, that you said you wanted to talk about housing because you people know more about it than you do. And I certainly agree that in many cities there's a huge housing crisis of affordable housing. That's why, unfortunately, so many cities have a big homeless problem. So what do you, and certainly for workers who are struggling to get by week to week, housing is often a huge problem. So what do you recommend that we do to make housing more affordable, especially when we have a federal government that doesn't seem to care less on the issue and its ways moving us backwards?
Well, you bring up a good point. That's why I'm running. We need to change presidents, and then we'll be on a better path. That's like the first thing we got to do. But let me talk substance. Let me talk policy here. First of all, I believe that fundamentally that housing ought to be a human right. That everybody should have a safe, decent, affordable place to live. Just like there's no reason that in this, the wealthiest nation on earth, that anybody should ever go without the health care they need and the medication they need when they need it. And I don't just mean health insurance, I mean health care. That there's no reason that anybody should go without a safe, decent place to live. So what would I do about that? First of all, during the course of the campaign in the next couple of months, we're going to release a comprehensive housing plan for the country. But here's what I think we can do, part of what we can do. Number one, we can amp up traditional tools of creating more affordable housing, like the low-income housing tax credit, expand that. We can also invest more in things like community development block grants and home funding. We also should utilize new tools, like the National Housing Trust Fund. The National Housing Trust Fund was stood up in 2015, but it's important because it's actually aimed at creating housing supply for people who are extremely low income, which basically means that they make less than 30% of the area median income. And these are the poorest people among us. And we need to significantly increase our investment in that National Housing Trust Fund. On top of that, we need to build on the work of the Obama administration that actually cut veteran homelessness between 2010 and 2016 by 47%. Imagine that, we almost cut it in half in 6 years. But we shouldn't stop with veterans. Also chronic homelessness, family homelessness. You know how many students you have who are doubling up, living with another family right now, or living with their parent in a car? We know what we can do to drive down the numbers of homeless in Las Vegas or in any community. It's just about the political will to actually do it. And I'm committed to doing it.
Thank you. And now we're going to take 2 questions from the audience. The first question comes from Annabella Aguirre Alacon. Annabella is a janitor in Los Angeles and a member of SEIU and Irish Association.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Annabella Aguirre, soy janitor de Los Ángeles y trabajo por la noche.
Hello, my name is Annabella Aguirre. I'm from Los Angeles and I'm a janitor in the night shift.
Y para mí, como para muchas de mis compañeras, es muy peligroso trabajar por la noche porque somos vulnerables a cualquier ataque o acoso sexual.
And for us, as women, we are vulnerable in the night shift because we can be targeted for sexual abuse.
Yo en lo personal fui violada por mi supervisor hace unos años y al año siguiente fui asaltada nuevamente en otro sitio de trabajo.
I was raped at my workplace, and a year later I was assaulted as well at my workplace.
Y eso a nosotros nos convierte vulnerables y fue difícil para mí afrontar la situación que viví.
That made us vulnerable, and it was really hard to face it for me.
Porque soy de Guatemala y tenía poco tiempo de haber llegado y me amenazaba el supervisor si denunciaba o llamaba a migración. Fue una situación difícil.
And I was threatened to be called on immigration if I speak up.
Y ahora puedo decir que de víctima sobreviviente no lo he superado completamente, pero estoy empoderada para poder ayudar a otras compañeras.
And now I went from victim to survivor, and I feel even I haven't completely get over it. Now I feel empowered, and I'm training other co-workers to fight the sexual abuse.
Y para poder cambiar esa cultura, ¿verdad? Que nosotros a veces como inmigrantes o también los contratistas nos ven como que ellos pueden abusar de nosotros las mujeres en cualquier sitio de trabajo.
So we are changing this culture because there are contractors who think they can abuse us because we are immigrants, because we are women, because we are vulnerable, but we are changing it.
Y gracias a mi sindicato, yo SWW con mis hermanas y mis hermanos he superado y ahora soy sobreviviente, soy empoderada. Y mi pregunta para usted.
And now, so I'm a survivor along with my sisters and brothers at the SEIU, and we feel empowered. So my question is.
Mi pregunta para usted, secretario Castro, es. Nosotros solas no podemos enfrentar esta situación. Como mujer y como inmigrante y como trabajadora, le hago la pregunta a usted. Hoy, ¿cómo ayudaría usted a las mujeres trabajadoras como yo para que estas corporaciones se hagan responsables de los acosos y violaciones sexuales en los sitios de trabajo?
So we cannot fight this by ourselves. So as a woman, as an immigrant, as a worker, I want to ask you, what are you going to do to hold corporations accountable for sexual abuse and harassment? Thank you.
Señora Alarcón, muchísimas gracias por su pregunta, por venir aquí y también por usando su voz a luchar para toda la comunidad y lo siento. I just said, Ms. Alarcón, thank you very much for the question, for being here. Thank you for using your voice to fight for everybody, and that I'm sorry for what happened to her. It's important that we support and strengthen legislation like the Violence Against Women Act. Right? It's important that we ensure that companies take sexual harassment and sexual assault seriously, and that we fund the efforts of police departments to adequately investigate sexual assault. I don't have to tell the people in this room how many rape kits are out there that are still untested. We need to make sure that we fund that. We also need to ensure that immigrants are no longer vulnerable in the way that they are. Because as you know, many times women who are immigrants, people feel like they can take advantage of them because they can do whatever they want, and the person won't go to the authorities because they don't want to risk deportation. That's why on April 2nd, I released something called my People First Immigration Plan. And my immigration plan really, it represents a vision completely different from this president. Basically, it says that we should put all undocumented immigrants who haven't committed a serious crime on a pathway to citizenship. But more than that, because everybody is going to say that. It says that we should decriminalize people who are crossing the border and make that a civil penalty and not a criminal one. The way that we used to treat it. That we should end 287G and have local law enforcement do local law enforcement business and federal law enforcement do federal law enforcement business. And if I'm president, I learned the lesson of 2009 and 2010, which is that I believe that on January 20th, 2021 at 12:01 p.m., we're going to have a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House. And the lesson of 2009, 2010 on immigration reform is don't wait. We're not going to wait. This time we're going to go forward. And in doing that, create a sense of security and protection for women and all persons who are undocumented so that they can feel more comfortable coming forward if something like that does happen. We want to make sure that it doesn't in the first place and work toward that, but if it does, we want to ensure that they feel comfortable coming forward and reporting it. And those are the things that I would do to tackle that. Thank you very much.
The next question is from Celeste Galeno. She's a member of SEIU Local 521 and has been a home-based, I'm sorry, I'm the wrong person, shoot me. Agnes Papa is a 32-year-old line service representative in Clark County's Department of Aviation and a member of SEIU Local 1107.
Hi, I'm Adonis Papa. I'm a member of SEIU Local 1107 here in Clark County, Nevada. I'm worried about the impact climate change will have on my life and my son's future. Low-income communities are often most impacted, whether it's their health, like increased asthma, or poor quality of water, or increased costs that people face, for example, from having to rebuild their homes, from destruction of floods or weather, higher heating, and in the case for us in Nevada, cooling bills that deal with high heated temperatures. How will you take immediate bold action on climate change, hold corporations responsible and accountable for rampant pollution in low-income communities, and create good union jobs and a green economy?
Thank you very much for that question. Let me begin by saying that all of y'all in this room know that we don't have to choose between protecting our planet and creating more jobs and opportunity. I like the Green New Deal because it recognizes that we can do both of those things. My first executive order, if I'm elected president on the afternoon of January 20th, 2021, will be after I usher off President Trump. First that afternoon, I'm going to tell him adios. When I get back to the desk, the first executive order would be to recommit the United States to the Paris Climate Accord, so that we really get on sustainability. But we can't stop there. I would support legislation to make massive investments in sustainability. What does that mean? That means tax credits for the renewable energy industry. It means incentivizing companies to do the right thing when it comes to cutting carbon emissions, and also state and local governments. It means going back to our partner countries around the world that entered into the Paris Climate Accord in the first place, and getting them to re-up and then commit to even more reductions, to be bolder. And the way that I think about these things, because you asked about the impact this has in communities, is that they're all connected. Just very, very quick story. When I was in my first or second year as a city councilman, I was like 26 or 27 years old, I went to this neighborhood meeting, and at the end of the meeting, we were talking about the budget. An adult woman in her 30s or 40s came up to me and she said, she asked me if I could get money in the budget to build sidewalks on her mom's street. Her mom was like in her 70s, because she said that her mom had been diagnosed with diabetes. And her doctor had advised her to walk around the neighborhood to improve her circulation. But the mom couldn't walk around the neighborhood because there were no sidewalks. She couldn't do it safely. And for me, it was the first time that as a young policymaker, the light bulb went off about how all of these things are connected. Right? About the fact that if you make this investment in infrastructure, that relates to somebody's health. It also relates to their safety and to the overall quality of life in the neighborhood. That's how I would approach these things if I'm president. So, as we cut the emissions in cars, in trucks, in buses, as we tackle things like clean water and make sure that communities like Flint have clean water in the first place, what we're really doing is that we're empowering young people, especially in low-income communities, and oftentimes, unfortunately, in communities of color, to be able to study harder like they want to learn better, to not have to deal with the terrible effects of things like lead poisoning that limits them, to be able to graduate from high school and then go on to college and go on to the working world, do what they want to do. So I see, these issues around environmental justice and sustainability is not only about doing the right thing for our planet, but also creating jobs, as you all have seen here with the solar energy industry and other industries, but also the well-being of so many people who are vulnerable right now and who don't get a full shot because they have to breathe dirty air or drink dirty water or contend with contaminated paint in their dwelling. All of those things are connected. And if I'm president, I will make a massive investment that relates to each and every one of those things to improve the quality of life and the economic opportunity in our nation.
Thank you. So we have 1 or 2 minutes left. Before you mentioned Uber drivers, and many unions are concerned, many workers are concerned that Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, are they independent contractors, are they employees, can they unionize? A lot of temps nowadays, a lot of freelancers nowadays, a lot of regular workers are misclassified as independent contractors. What would you do about all this to make it easier for these people to unionize, to raise standards for them, to provide them with benefits?
Well, look, I will always look for either executive actions that we can take or legislation that we can support to ensure that more workers have the right to organize in our country and make appointments to people to the NLRB and other organizations that understand and value the right to organize. I am concerned about the fact that companies, I think in many ways are cutting corners in classifying people as independent contractors, and also companies like Uber and Lyft, although, I use Lyft sometimes, right? But it's creating a whole generation of people that don't have any health insurance from their employer in a system that's set up around employer-based health insurance. They don't have a lot of other benefits, much less a pension or even a 401k. That's why we need to step in and provide a 21st century safety net. So I would actively pursue the right of workers to organize and support that in state and local governments to do, but then push that 21st century safety net that reflects where we're at today as a country and not just where we were 50 years ago, because we can't count on that anymore.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Gracias.